Do you have tattoos? Today I want to share how getting tattooed changed my perception of graphic design. Hey there, thanks for tuning in. I am Mark Decote, and this is Resourceful Designer, the best, at least in my opinion, podcast to help you start, run, and grow your graphic design business. And today I want to talk about tattoos. Now, I got my first tattoo at the age of 53. And that was just a few years ago. I'm 56 now, and I actually have 6 tattoos on my body. Now, I grew up in a time where tattoos were not as common or normal as they are today. In my youth, tattoos were mostly associated with the, let's just say, unsavory people. But obviously things have changed, and now they've become quite norm. And in fact, they're used as a personality statement. Now, I was always fascinated by tattoos, but never really had an interest in them until my daughter, who is an excellent artist, actually a much better artist than I've ever been, decided to give tattooing a try. Now, she started off, she bought herself some equipment. She went through all the proper certification. I didn't even realize this, that there's so many different courses you have to take in order to become a tattooist. Not art courses or that sort of thing, but stuff about blood and stuff about sterilization. And anyways, that you've got to be certified in all these different things before you can safely practice tattooing. Well, she started off and she started practicing on fake skin and on melons of all things. Something else I didn't know, she was tattooing melons until she felt ready to actually tattoo skin. Now, being the good father that I am and my wife, the good mother that she is, we volunteered ourselves to be guinea pigs. Now, we weren't her first. My daughter actually tattooed herself as her first quote-unquote canvas. She tattooed something onto her leg. And then a few days later, she came to visit and she brought her equipment and she tattooed a beautiful, it's a very stylized tattoo of 2 dragonflies on my wife's ankle. Now, for myself, I had ideas. When she started practicing to become a tattoo artist and I figured, okay, well, I'm going to get a tattoo from her, I started thinking of all sorts of ideas that I wanted to get. Now, I am heavy into fantasy and that, and I love dragons. And in fact, 3 of my 6 tattoos are of dragons. But the things I wanted were a little bit more ambitious than the level she was at the time. So I started thinking, what could I get that I would like, but wouldn't be too difficult for her to do? And I decided to settle on my logo for my business. Now, I'm not talking about podcast branding. If you've been following the podcast for a while, you know I talk a lot about that, the second business I started in 2018, which has pretty well taken over everything I do. But I have another business, the one I started in 2005, Marksman Design. And back in 2005, I designed a logo. Now, the name Marksman is derived from my name, Mark, and I just thought, Marksman, that's kind of cool. But I didn't want it to be associated with firearms. So I designed an icon to go with the name of an archer. As I mentioned, I've always been into fantasy. I love things like Robin Hood. I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons, most of the time playing a ranger character, which uses a bow and arrow as their main weapon. So I thought it was appropriate for me to have an archer to represent Marksman Design. So I designed a stylized archer based on different things. Again, I'm not the great artist like my daughter is, but I found a bunch of different references and I designed something that I liked. And obviously I did because it's now over 20 years later and I'm still using it for my logo. So I thought that was a good one to use as a tattoo. So I had the logo, not the wording. I don't have the wording. I just have the icon itself tattooed on my left shoulder. And it turned out great and I love it. And as I said, since then, I've gotten multiples. It's true what they say. If you've ever heard somebody say, when you get tattooed, it almost becomes an addiction. You want to get another one. And every time you get one, you start thinking, what's my next one going to be? And I'm already contemplating what my 7th tattoo will be. And just in case you're curious, I have that archer on my left shoulder. I have 2 dragons on my right forearm, one on the outside of my forearm, one on the inside. The one on the outside is a dragon clutching a sword, and the one on the inside is a dragon with his paw resting on a 20-sided die. If you're familiar with role-playing games, you're familiar with a D20. The dragon's front paw or hand or whatever is resting on a 20-sided die. And on my left arm, I have a wraith, a cloaked, hooded figure holding a sword on the outside of my forearm. And on the inside, I have a dragon's head with a sword going through the head. And my final tattoo is a big spider that is on my left calf. That's something I just told my daughter. I really like her style, and she had done a bunch of what you call flash, which is something else I learned. Flash is pre-made illustrations that you can go in and say, oh, I want that for my tattoo. Well, she had made a whole bunch of stuff, and I went and I told her that you can use one of your flashes on my leg. And we settled on this really nice spider. I really like it. Anyways, now I love all my tattoos. They're all black and white line art, very little shading, which is the style I want and the style that she specializes in. And each one of them is unique and tells a story. But there is one, the one on my left inside forearm, which is the dragon head with the sword passing through it. In hindsight, there is something about that tattoo that I would have liked to change. You see, the eyes on the dragon, I find now, looking back, I find the eyes are too small. I would have liked the eyes to be bigger. But there's really nothing you can do, because once you get a tattoo, it is permanent. Now, yes, you can use laser treatment, which is very expensive to have the tattoos removed, but I'm not going to go through that just to correct something like erase where the eyes are so she can do the eyes bigger. So for the most part, when you get a tattoo, it's permanent. It's there for life, and you got to live with it. And I love the tattoo. As I said, in hindsight, I wish I would have had the eyes a little bit bigger, but it still looks great in my opinion. But it's that little bit that got me thinking about the differences between tattooing and graphic design. Because in graphic design, we have the benefit of going in to change things, even after they've been finalized. Think about rebrands. How many times has big corporations or companies rebranded their logo? Look at Apple, look at Coca-Cola, look at Ford Motor Company. They've all been around for a long time, and over the years, their logo, their brand has changed. It has evolved and has gone through sometimes subtle changes, sometimes big changes. And that is one of the powers that graphic designers have, is to be able to go in and make those changes. Unlike tattoos, where really, once the tattoo's done, there's really nothing you can do. Yes, you can go in and add on to it, or in some cases, if you really don't like it, you can get what's called a cover-up, if that works. Sometimes you can't do it, but sometimes you can get a different tattoo put down on top of the original to hide the original, but that's not the same. But with graphic design, we have the ability to go in and make a change to something. If somebody decides after a few years that their logo just, they want to revamp it or modernize it, you can go in and make some tweaks and change it. If you design a poster for somebody and something changes, you can go in and make a change. We have that power. There is no design in the world, for graphic design or web design for that matter, that can't be changed. Now, yes, if we design something for print, the printed pieces go out and really there's not much you can do, although I have seen people put stickers on top of stuff to make changes on a printed piece, which I always think is ridiculous. But the design itself can always be changed before printing more things. If you don't like it, you scrap the printed stuff. If there was an error on it, you can scrap the printed stuff and just fix the error and reprint. We have that power. We have that benefit. And yet, I know many designers, whenever they're designing something, they strive for perfection. They want the final piece to be absolutely perfect. And I understand that. I mean, I'm guilty of that as well. I want the best for my clients and for myself. But sometimes striving for that perfection can actually impede us. It can delay things. It could increase scope. It can gnaw at us as we're trying to perfect that piece. In reality, a lot of times, the designer is trying to perfect something that to everybody else already looks, quote unquote, perfect. There are so many times where I will sit at a design and I will nudge something up 1 millimeter and go, does it look better there? Or do I move it down 1 millimeter? And it's like, to me, it's like back and forth. Which one is better? Which one look, and not counting just the mathematical times where you want to position something and you say, the proper way to do it is mathematically. You figure out the exact position where it's supposed to be. But sometimes it's just visually, you look at it and a little nudge this way or a little nudge that way. Which way is better? When in reality, if you were to show one or the other to somebody, they would never notice the difference. In fact, if you put the two of them side by side, there's many people who would not be able to spot that that one thing has been nudged over a millimeter or not. They would say that they are identical. But as designers, we strive for that perfection, and sometimes that can actually hold us back from completing projects. And that's something you have to learn, and it took me a long time to learn that because, again, I want everything to be the best. But because design can be changed, it can evolve over time. Even the best logo that you design or the best whatever else that you design can always be tweaked later, maybe months later, years later. Stuff can change. Maybe just a little font change or a little angle to this or adjust the color on that. It can all be changed at a later date, which means we have to open up and we have to be a little bit vulnerable and say that, this design is really, really good. And that it's one of those things, there's no such thing as perfection. You can strive for it, and there's nothing wrong with striving for it, but there is no such thing as perfection in our industry because things could always be changed. Things could always be made better. I look at the website for podcast branding. I just changed the entire homepage on the website just a couple of days ago. And I can tell you within the last year, I've made multiple changes to my homepage. It seems every time I go onto the website, I'll look at something, I'll go, that can change. I can make that a little bit better. But what happened to the last time I did it? Didn't I say that last time? Didn't I say, I can make this better? And I did. And yet now I'm going back and I'm saying I'm going to make it better again. Like, what's wrong with the better from last time? And that's the power we have as graphic designers. We can go in and we can make all these changes. We can evolve things. We can improve things constantly. And sometimes improving doesn't necessarily mean adding on. It could mean taking away. In fact, the homepage on podcast branding right now has much less information on it than the one I had previously. I got rid of entire sections of my homepage. I wanted to simplify things. And that's another power we have as a designer. And that's a power that a lot of clients don't understand, is that sometimes in order to make the design better, you have to take stuff away. You have to simplify things. The more complicated it is, the more complicated it is. And it becomes harder to understand, harder to decipher the meaning behind things. So oftentimes, taking something away or simplifying it actually improves the design. So we have to know when a design is done, when we're finished with it. And that reminds me of another story that I'm pretty sure I've shared this on the podcast before. My brother, my oldest brother, he passed away several years ago. He was an amazing artist. He did charcoal, he did pencil, he did all sorts of paints. His favorite was watercolor. In fact, he was so good that when he was younger, he spent a year backpacking across Europe, and he had very little to no money. And what he would do is he would stop somewhere. He would see a very nice old building. He would stop on the side of the road, pull out his watercolors, make a painting of the building, go knock on the door, and then ask them. He says, "Here, I made this painting. I'll take whatever." And sometimes they would give him a few dollars for it. Sometimes they'd give him a lot more. Sometimes they had no money, but they would invite him in for a meal. And that's how he funded his trip across Europe. He spent a year there. Well, anyways, as I said, my brother was an amazing artist, and he always saw the opportunity to paint something. And there was one day, he didn't live near us. He lived at the other end of the country in British Columbia. So one time when I was young, I was probably around 12 or 13 years old, he came down for a visit, and he decided to take my dad's car. He was going to go out. He just wanted to go painting, and he asked me if I wanted to go along and find something to paint. So we went out for a drive, and I loved, spending time with my brother because I didn't often get to do that. And we stopped on the side of the road in a rural area outside the city where there's an old covered bridge. Now, this is more a walking style bridge, not for cars. Anyways, the bridge is not important. So we stopped on the side of the road, and it was old, it was worn out, and he saw the beauty in that. And we stopped on the side of the road, and he set up an easel, and he had there was another easel that he had given me. So I set up, and we started painting. Now, me being the non-artist that I am, I was done after about 15, 20 minutes. I had my painting finished. It was like, okay, there's a painting. It looks like covered bridge. Nothing spectacular about it. Obviously, I'm not that great an artist. But he spent a lot of time going through with his brushes and his water and, making a little change here, a little change there. And I just sat there mesmerized watching him paint and how he can see things and add it to the painting and make things appear that, anyways, it was just spectacular watching him. And then at one point, he's adding a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. Then he takes his brush and he dips it in the black paint. He looks at the painting again. He looks out at the bridge and he just sits there staring for, I don't know, it just seemed like a long time. And then he goes down to the corner and he signs his name. And that was it. Then he starts packing up. And I asked him, his name was Bob, or actually he went by Rob in Vancouver, but to our family here, he was always Bob. And I asked him, I says, Bob, how do you know the painting's done? And that's when he told me something that has stuck with me. And it's still one of the principles that I use in design today. And he looked at me and he said, no painting is ever done. There's always something you can do to it. But at some point, the artist has to decide that they are done with the painting. And that I just found so profound. No painting is ever done, but the artist has to be done with the painting. And that's when he signs it, when he feels that he is done. And that goes to the same principle that I was talking about earlier, about perfection. There is no such thing as perfection. There's striving for it, which is wonderful. We should all strive for perfection. But I don't know if I ever want to actually reach that perfection. I don't know if I ever want to reach that pinnacle where my designs are perfect. Because then what do you do after that? You know that it's unachievable to reach perfection on every single thing you do. And if you do manage to reach perfection, what happens on the next project? You're going to be disappointed. So that's why I believe that perfection is impossible, but we should still be striving for it. And it's just funny. I was looking at my tattoos the other day and it got me thinking about that because these are permanent and whether they're perfect or not, there's nothing we can do. I can't change these tattoos. As I said, short of paying for laser surgery to have them removed or adding on to them in order to try to change them. But the base tattoo is there for the rest of my life. And that made me think of the benefit of the ability, the power we have as graphic designers, that we can go into a design, whether it was done yesterday, whether it was done last month, whether it was done years ago, and we can go in and make changes to it. We can improve it. We can alter it any way we see fit. And that is powerful. That is an ability that we have. And I don't know. I wanted to share that. I don't know if it means anything to you, but it was just something I felt. And I said, this is worth sharing with the community. And I hope you get some sort of value of thinking about that. Anyways, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Now, I would love for you to reach out to me. If you do have tattoos, send me a photo. I would love to see what you have. Email me at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com. I'll include a couple of photos in the show notes for this episode, resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 358, for you to see mine. So please send me an email. Show me what your tattoos are. And let me know if you agree with my thoughts here, that the power we have as designers to go in and just change things. Nothing is permanent, not like the tattoos we have. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best, whether you have tattoos or not. Either way, I want you to stay creative. And now it's time for another voiceover by Wayne Henderson of MediaVoiceovers.com. After this one, I only have 2 more to share with you. Wonder what I'm going to do after that. But here's this one. Take it away, Wayne.
And now, your host. He needs to cut back on the knickknacks. He's running out of room for them in his office. Mark Decote.
I keep telling myself that, and yet, for some reason, I can always find somewhere to squeeze something new in. You know how it goes.